a $50 million jet, a department claiming it's broke, and a senator who finally asked the question every taxpayer has been thinking but never heard spoken out loud. Because when Ruben Gallego leaned into that microphone and demanded to know why a government agency on the verge of running out of money was somehow carving out room in the budget for a brand new Gulf Stream, the room shifted. It wasn't political theater. It wasn't a gotcha moment. It was the kind of question that slices straight through excuses, talking points, and carefully prepped testimony. And what happened next revealed far more than anyone on that panel expected. Because here's the uncomfortable truth Gallego exposed within seconds.
Again, by mid-July, to support a mass deportation campaign that can't be afforded. At the same time, though, you recently requested a $50 million allotment for a private Gulfstream jet. That's $50 million of taxpayer money to subsidize some of your national tours that you've been going on. Meanwhile, Republicans are about to kick another 13 million people off Medicaid to fund taxes for the rich on the backs of some working-class Americans. So how can you justify spending millions, 50 million, on a jet while your department is definitely overspending and Republicans in Congress are about to strip also health care from millions of Americans?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. We are spending our dollars appropriately and will be on budget. When your reference to the airframe that was the requested dollars were put in for, that's for the Coast Guard. It's to replace an existing jet that is over 20 years old and is beyond its usable hours. And the Coast Guard for many, many years has been neglected and has many airframe that have been grounded because they can't even be maintained anymore. The suppliers that give us parts and repairs and maintenance for them have said that they'll no longer support that kind of a mission. We have cutters that haven't been completed, that haven't been deployed out across the world. And then we also, beyond that, are asking for a request to build out the number of Coast Guard members that we need in place. We're asking for 15,000 more to complete the missions that are going forward.
Are you going to have access to that $50 million Gulfstream jet that the Coast Guard is going to supply?
The Coast Guard will use that jet exactly how it uses the jets that it has today, exactly in the same manner that it uses the ones that it has in place today.
So would you consistently be using it to travel?
I don't know if I would use that one or if I would use the other one. I have no idea. But I do spend time out there with our components, making sure that they are know that they have a secretary that's engaged with them, that's visiting with them, seeing what their needs are. No, sir, they're not photos. They've meant the world to the individuals at the Department of Homeland Security. They have meant the world to our ICE agents, our border agents. When they ask me to be out there with them, so they know what their lives are like.
Talking to some law enforcement, besides those under DHS, we've also seen some law enforcement that have been pulled away from investigations such as child porn, sex trafficking. We've had some agents pulled in that were doing investigations on bank fraud that are now, provisional ICE agents. And I think creating and making them do this type of work is also making us more and more dangerous since they're not actually doing this long-term investigation. On the other hand, I have talked to some border chiefs and sheriffs repeatedly, and they've been highlighting the danger associated with cartels targeting teenagers in border communities through social media apps and recruiting them to participate in smuggling operations. And one of the bills I introduced with several colleagues here actually is the Combating Cartels on Social Media Act, which will help DHS counter this threat. Arizona communities cannot wait for the legislative process to play out on this. What is DHS doing to solve this problem and help keep American children and communities safe from cartel criminal activity and recruitment too?
Well, that is the problem that we have with the longer that they're here, the more established they become and the more they recruit individuals who may live in this country, U.S. citizens, or even our kids to be a part of
some
their
of them are
operations.
actually on the other side too. So it's both sides.
What do you mean on their side?
Some of the cartels are using social media on, let's say, Mexico,
yes,
wherever.
Yes, definitely they are.
So it's back and forth.
Yes, they definitely are. But they also are infiltrating our country still by recruiting our children to be a part of their networks.
That's the problem, yeah.
So we're working with not just the experts that we have within CBP and ICE, but also using our other components to address some of the sophistication that we've seen in these apps as far as CISA and partnerships that they may have with private industry that can give us insight in what we can do to deploy our own counter-terrorist activities and applications to those systems, what we can do to make sure that we're stopping their ability to communicate with our children and bringing awareness. The Department of Homeland Security has programs in different areas, such as the
and I
Know
just-
to
but
Protect and the other programs you may be familiar
Have you
with.
been able to
that-
work directly with the social media companies, though, not just through the legislative
We have had
process? Like,
conversations with the social media
they-
companies, and
because
we've,
by the time we get around to do it,
Right.
we're losing more and more people. So like having a very direct conversation and a concentrated effort to actually have outcomes is going to be quicker because they have the option to do it. We don't have to come in and do it. They just choose not to because they'd rather make more money than anything else.
well, that may be, but I found them very willing to come to the table. I've had myself spent dozens of hours with them, and my team has spent hundreds of hours visiting with them on what we can do to be much more proactive. So they've got some solutions that we can pursue. We'll be coming to you with some of those ideas, but I think it's important that we use their knowledge of this way of communication and recruitment to help protect our children.
Get back.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Secretary.
You can't claim poverty while shopping for luxury aircraft. You can't talk about budget emergencies when millions of Americans are being told programs like Medicaid must shrink, but the department asking for those cuts is simultaneously requesting a jet with a price tag big enough to fund entire clinics for a year. And you definitely can't sell the message that every dollar counts when the public sees the receipts and wonders how we're out of money, somehow only applies to them. The moment he said $50 million Gulfstream jet, the whole conversation flipped. Everyone watching understood this wasn't about one plane. It was about what the choice represents. And Gallego knew exactly how to make that contrast unavoidable. He brought up the people who would actually feel the squeeze. The millions at risk of losing health care, the families living paycheck to paycheck, the workers who get told every budget season that there's simply nothing left to help them. Then he held that reality up against a request that looked more like an executive perk than a national necessity. You didn't need a policy background to understand the contradiction. All you needed was common sense. And when the answer came, it didn't settle anything. The response was that the aircraft was for the Coast Guard. A replacement. An upgrade for an aging jet that had supposedly reached its limit. But Gallego didn't let the conversation drift into technicalities. His focus wasn't the label on the aircraft. It was the access. Who would be able to use it? Who would benefit from it? Who would be transported in it? And more importantly, would the person asking for the money be stepping onto that jet themselves? What came next was telling. Not a no. Not a clarification. Not a reassurance. Just uncertainty. I don't know. I have no idea. That answer rang louder than any admission because it nodded to the possibility everyone had already suspected. If the department gets this aircraft, the line between Coast Guard jet and executive travel vehicle might not be as sharp as they want the public to believe. And that ambiguity is exactly where trust begins to crumble. But Gallego wasn't done, because spending isn't just about purchases, it's about priorities. And when an agency is so stretched that it's pulling agents away from long-term investigations, real investigations involving child exploitation, financial crimes, trafficking networks, you would think every available resource would be poured into rebuilding that capacity. Instead, those agents are being reassigned to cover other operations, leaving critical cases sitting in limbo. Gallego made it clear. These aren't disposable roles. These investigations require expertise, continuity, and months of focused work. You can't swap in a random replacement and expect the same results. And every time an investigator is pulled to fill temporary duty elsewhere, a case slows down, a suspect slips away, a lead goes cold. This is where the frustration became impossible to hide, because the pattern is obvious. High-visibility operations get the spotlight and the funding. Quiet, long-term investigative work, the kind that prevents crimes, protects victims, and dismantles whole networks, gets pushed aside. And Gallego was determined to make the cost of that strategy visible to the public. He described investigators who were trained for complex cases now being redirected to fulfill short-term demands that do nothing to address the root issues. He pointed out how those decisions weaken the system from the inside out. And he did it in a way that forced everyone to look past the surface level and into the deeper consequences. Then he moved to a threat that has exploded in recent years. A threat many families don't realize is happening in their own communities until it's too late. Cartels using social media to recruit teenagers into smuggling operations. This isn't speculation. This isn't rumor. These are real cases showing up in Arizona, Texas, California, and border towns across the Southwest. Kids getting lured with promises of quick money. Teens getting pulled into dangerous missions because someone in their DMs convinced them they could make a few $1,000s fast. Parents seeing their children vanish into criminal networks before they even realized what was happening. Gallego demanded to know what the department was doing about it right now. Not what studies they were conducting, not what committees they were forming, not what theoretical plans they wanted to consider months from now. He wanted to know how the government was protecting American kids today. And the answer he got, once again, felt scattered and incomplete. Conversations with tech companies, ideas being explored, proposals on the way, hours of meetings, but no concrete strategy, no decisive action, nothing that matched the urgency of a threat happening in real time. This is where Gallego's line of questioning became bigger than one budget request or one aircraft. He was exposing a pattern that echoes through every level of the hearing. Resources moving toward projects that create the appearance of progress while the problems that actually endanger Americans get pushed to the sidelines. It's the difference between being visible and being effective, between announcements and results, between being seen doing something and actually making people safer. And that's why the Gulfstream jet question matters more than it may seem at first glance. It's not about the plane itself. It's about what choosing that plane over other investments reveals. A luxury request framed as a necessity, at a time when the department is telling Congress that money is running dangerously low. An expensive purchase placed ahead of restoring investigative units that protect children. A new aircraft prioritized while the people on the ground, agents, analysts, sheriffs, and communities facing cartel recruitment, are left trying to operate with limited tools. Gallego's interrogation wasn't just frustration. It was an attempt to pull the mask off the deeper issue. When leaders choose to spend money on projects that make them look more active, more powerful, more present, everyday Americans pay the price. You can't weaken long-term investigative divisions and call it strategy. You can't let teenagers get targeted on social media and call your response proactive. And you can't ask for a $50 million jet while saying there is no money for healthcare, education, or public safety without expecting people to start asking serious questions. What makes this moment stand out is that Noam couldn't give a firm defense. She couldn't make a compelling argument that the jet was more important than restoring investigative units. She couldn't explain why the request was urgent while basic needs remain unfunded. She couldn't even give a clear yes or no about whether she would use the aircraft herself. And every one of those gaps made Gallego's point even sharper. Because budgets don't lie. Budgets are the clearest statement of values any government makes. They show you what matters and what doesn't. They show you who benefits and who gets pushed aside. They show you which programs get rescued and which get left to collapse. And in this hearing, the budget laid the story bare. Gallego forced the department to confront that reality in real time. Every comparison he made, every contradiction he highlighted, pulled the conversation out of the safety of talking points and into the harsh light of priorities. When millions are about to lose healthcare but a cabinet-level department has room for a luxury jet, you don't need complicated analysis to understand something is broken. You just need someone willing to say it out loud. And that's exactly what he did. He connected the dots out loud. He named the trade-offs out loud. He said the quiet part out loud. If a government is truly running out of money, then the first thing to go shouldn't be healthcare for low-income families. It shouldn't be investigative units that protect children from exploitation. It shouldn't be the agents working complex cases that keep communities safe. The first thing to go should be non-essential, high-cost items that benefit leadership, not the public. What this hearing captured is a moment of clarity in a system that often relies on confusion. A system where shifting answers, vague promises, and carefully scripted statements usually let controversial decisions slip by unnoticed. But when pressed by someone who refuses to let the conversation drift away, those decisions become impossible to hide. That's why this moment resonated. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an outburst. It was a reveal. A reveal of how money flows inside agencies that claim scarcity. A reveal of the difference between programs that truly protect the public and purchases that simply make departments appear more powerful. A reveal of what gets prioritized when the cameras are off, and who gets left to deal with the consequences when those priorities miss the mark. And that's the story worth paying attention to, because hearings like this aren't just political arguments. They're windows into how decisions get made, how money gets moved, and how the public's well-being gets weighed against internal preferences. You don't have to agree with Gallego's politics to understand the importance of the question he asked. Every taxpayer, no matter their background, wants to know why a government that claims it's broke can somehow afford a brand new Gulf Stream. The answer still isn't clear. And that's exactly why this conversation matters. If you want more breakdowns that don't just replay the moment but dig into what's really happening, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. These hearings aren't just noise, they're clues about how power works, how budgets shift, and what decisions happen behind closed doors. Stay tuned because the next one is even bigger.